All right, everybody, welcome back to the How to Sell Insurance podcast. My name is Ryan Federico. I'm here with the two baddest men on the planet, Ashton Delango Lunday, fresh off a sick run, Mr. Grant Lieber in the house. We've got an exciting topic to bring to you guys today. What we want to be talking about today and what we want to help you guys with is how to hire staff for your agency. In particular, what most people's first staff hire is, which is an appointment setter. How to find an appointment setter, how to pay an appointment setter, how to train an appointment setter, how to hold them accountable, all of those things. And this topic was actually brought up by Grant Lieber, probably because he was just going through the frustrations of hiring an appointment setter, right? Or something like that. A lot of people get trapped in the process of hiring an appointment setter. So we want to share our experience and some of the tips and tricks that we picked up along the way. But I think it's only fitting to kind of pass this over to Grant since he was the one that kind of came up with this topic and see what his thoughts are on it, man. So Grant, why is this so important?
Yeah. So appointment setters have been so crucial to my business, Ryan. I think that when it comes to the standpoint of being effective as a producer, having more time in your calendar to be able to take care of some other things, especially if you are someone who is building an agency and is taking care of some of those building and mentoring activities, having an appointment setter has been crucial to my journey here. So I think what it's important is that we run through kind of who is maybe appropriate to have an appointment setter. When is it right to hire that person? How do you hire that person? What are some expectations that you can set to make sure that you're getting the right person? What pay scale should you have? And then how to evaluate if that's the right person moving forward, because you have to be really, really careful with staffing, especially when you have someone who's working your leads and kind of your production is somewhat based on their performance. You got to be really careful to know that you do have the right person. So I think the first piece of that, Ryan, would be what stage of the business should you be at before you bring on an appointment setter? And to me, I think that you need to be an established producer that's consistently written business week in and week out. You know how to get resolution on your leads. You know exactly what type of ratios you should get depending on what lead you're working. And you should be able to know how to effectively coach and train somebody else. And all of those factors are important because I've had newer agents that have come on board to our team and they've said, hey, you know what? I'm going to go ahead and just hire someone to book appointments for me from the very beginning. And I think that's a big mistake that people make because they haven't done it themselves. They're not in a position where they know how to actually help someone else be coached up to the right thing. They have no idea if this person is going to work the leads effectively or just burn them. And they're kind of just being lazy, to be honest. So I would say the first part of this kind of staffing up situation when you're hiring an appointment setter is understanding, have you developed the skills to be able to, number one, consistently book appointments, consistently sit with families, consistently write business so that you know the end-to-end process. And then from there, have you developed the skills as a coach or a mentor to be able to actually help somebody do that? Because you need to be able to onboard this person. You need to be able to constantly correct the activity that they're doing to make sure that they're not going to be burning your leads. Because whenever we delegate something, they kind of say if the other person can do it 80% as good as you, or some people say 60% as good as you can, that's kind of a good thing that you should delegate. And so the reality of it is that no one is going to be as good of an appointment setter as you are. That's generally how it works out. So you need to be willing to know that you're going to have someone who is going to burn a percentage of your leads. So by hiring an appointment setter, there is going to be an additional expense. You're going to have to probably send that person more leads than you would book yourself to be able to get the same desired result. But I think that as long as someone can do about 80% of as good as you could booking, then that would be the right person for me to get started with.
Yeah. I agree that one of the biggest mistakes that I see people make is hiring too early, bringing people on too early. And mainly because I think you said their laziness and it is really, that's the best way to describe it. It's laziness or it's fear of, not wanting to get on the phone. But the problem with that is they can never hold the appointment setter accountable because they're just like, oh, thank God somebody else is calling for me and I don't have to make the calls. And they can't demand that, like, no, I know if you made these calls, you should have set this number of appointments. And so when you can't hold an employee accountable to show up and do the things that they're hired to do, it typically never works out. Very small percentage works out. And people end up spending a bunch of money. They go out of business because they're not willing to do the work themselves. And they're hiring somebody to do the work that they're not willing to do. And it's a terrible combination. I see that happen quite often, and it's just sort of a nosedive for for people whenever they bring somebody on, man. But
And one of the biggest things is really when you're hiring for something, it should be in order to help you have more money making activity. And that's the biggest key. And that's where a lot of times in any of those hiring decisions, it's more of, well, this would just be more convenient so I can go do XYZ that doesn't make money. And that's one of the biggest pieces when it comes to hiring an appointment setter. Also, it's having, like, do you actually need to have that time? Because they're not going to be as good as you. They're not as motivated as you to book those appointments. So if they're not as good as you and it takes longer than you, well, it's going to cost you more money potentially. And if you're really not writing probably 40 to 50,000 plus a month in volume and not running a large agency, there probably isn't a need for an appointment setter, because it's like, what are you doing with your time then to write 10, 20, even 30,000 in a month doesn't really necessitate needing a appointment setter unless you have a very large team. Like Grant, has a large team. Other people have a large team. So when you have a very, very large team and there's multiple managers you're managing and producers you're managing direct to yourself, and those are taking your time out of the field to be able to produce because you have to help so many people. Yeah, those things can necessitate that. Well, and that's why there's like the texting systems, which kind of helped with an appointment setter, because now I don't have to dial as much because I can text. While I'm helping agents, I can be texting clients and booking appointments. So that's probably one of the biggest pieces when it comes to that hiring piece of, am I actually producing so much that I need an appointment setter, or do I have a large enough team and I'm helping enough people at the right time, actually following a system in order to need an appointment setter? That's the biggest piece.
the rule of thumb that I heard that I sort of lived by for a while that I suggest to people is that in order to bring on an appointment setter or an employee effectively, you should be net profiting twice as much as you need to live on in your business. So if you need $8,000 a month to cover your bills, you should be net profiting $16,000 a month before you bring on somebody to scale, because it's probably going to take that. One of the things that Grant mentioned earlier, when we get now into, I guess, phase two. So I guess the question one is like, when should you hire an appointment setter? And be careful of hiring an appointment setter too early, or if your business really isn't a place where you can even afford to take on an employee. Don't take on an appointment setter just because you're unwilling to do the work and you're hoping that somebody else will come save you, because that'll fail 90% of the time. But if you are in a position to hire an appointment setter, what's a good way to go about it? And I think that there's plenty of agents that come into our industry and kind of realize that they're not really great at sales. They're good at phone work, or they're great at communicating with people, but the pressure of sales doesn't really work well for them. And so putting that out into a community of agents on Facebook, or if your company has a community of agents or people that are decent at setting appointments but aren't really good at making sales yet, maybe you can kind of bridge the gap there. Finding people on, international, hiring sites, like Fiverr, Upwork, stuff like that. There's plenty of people that have done work like this and will continue to do work like this. But I think that one of the key pieces that I always want to fall back to is like, I know that I'm going to run through probably 3 or 4 of the wrong person before I find the right person. And I didn't expect that when I was first hiring an appointment setter or an employee. I thought like, I was just going to get any random person and they were just going to pick up and be totally great on the phones. And now looking back on that, it seems kind of silly, because I know how many agents come into, any insurance and any part of the insurance industry and struggle with learning a script and overcoming objections and setting appointments. Why would I think just some random person, is going to be great that I found, online on Fiverr or something like that? And so I need to prepare to waste a bunch of money in leads, because I'm going to need to buy extra leads to give that person space in the learning curve to correct them. I need to invest the time in listening to them, setting appointments and giving them feedback. I need to give them some leeway to mess up a little bit before I can kind of determine, is this person going to be good for me long term or not? So it's going to take extra leads. It's going to take extra hours. I can't need to pay that person however many dollars an hour and make the money back from them that first week. I have to have 3 or 4 weeks of runway to get them acclimated and up and running for me to get the ROI off of their work in order to pay it back. And so if you're on a short runway, if you're not automatically making double what you need to survive on a regular basis, it's probably not the time for you to hire an employee, right? It's not the time for you to bring on an appointment setter just because you don't want to make the calls. It's probably just time for you to get on the phones and start making double what you need to make, right? in a month. But let's talk about like actually finding somebody now, and what do you look for in an appointment setter? Like, what are typically the traits that you're looking for when you hire, an appointment setter?
Yeah. So for me, there really hasn't been, I don't think a time I've really had an appointment setter. So, the number one piece on my side, kind of came down to the when to hire. It's just, I've never had that need to go, hey, I'm producing at such a high level. I need someone else, producing at a normal level. Last year was averaging 25 grand a month annual premium. You don't really need an appointment. So for me, I've never really had to go out there and find one.
Yeah. What about a production assistant or somebody else to help you in other areas of the business? What are you typically looking for when you do that?
If it's a production assistant, it's a much, much different set of qualification skills. I mean, you're looking for someone who's a lot more systems oriented, because when you're talking about a production assistant, I mean, it can mean a variety of things. It's a very, very versatile role, and that definition can vary frequently in whoever you talk to. But a typical production assistant is going to be someone who's just following up on policies that have been submitted and making sure that they get placed. And if it doesn't get placed, figuring out why. Is there a pending requirement? Is it just pending review by the carrier? Is something needed from the client? Is something needed from the agent? Well, what is needed to get this thing placed? So someone who is systems oriented to keep a running log of, here are all of these cases, and moving it through their system to go, all right, this was written by the agent to placed and issued and paid in that agent's pocket. So someone very systems oriented is a great hire there.
Yeah, I mean, I would definitely agree with those things. I think this also kind of ties into how you're going to compensate them. Is you need to have someone who is going to be willing to be paid based on performance. I don't believe in hiring anyone to be a appointment setter that isn't willing to have at least some component of their pay be based on commission or based on, what amount of appointments they set or a particular show factor. So I would say, I think what you alluded to earlier is kind of maybe an agent that might have been organized. They might have had to get attention to detail. They might have been good on the phones, but maybe on the actual appointment side or sort of the sales side, they maybe weren't as comfortable there. I think that's the best sweet spot. In fact, the appointment setter I have is someone who had always never struggled to be able to book appointments, was always effective with leads, always knew how to convert them at the right level, but kind of struggled on more of the presentation side and kind of digging into the need and kind of staying in control on a presentation. And so that person became a perfect fit to be able to help me, where obviously the presentation is not, a challenge for me, but what was a challenge is just having the time to be able to do the appointment setting on the front end. So for me, if I was going to be posting an ad and I had to replace my appointment setter, I'm going to be looking for someone who definitely is going to be diligent. Preferably, they have an insurance license, so they actually have some experience in this space and they do kind of get a feel for our products and how it works and that kind of thing. They have to be someone who's going to be willing to go through training and a learning curve, and they're going to have to be willing to have consistent, massive action and constant correction. We talk about that for an agent. That's also going to be an expectation I have for an appointment setter that's paid. In terms of the pay structure, it's okay if they want to have a base salary. In fact, the way that I pay my appointment setter is it's a flat $20 per hour. And then I also pay him an additional 5% of the annual premium of the policies that I sell. So I kind of think of that as kind of it's an incentive based on him booking high quality appointments where people are going to show up, because he's going to get paid. The bulk of his income is actually as a result of that 5% APV when I do right business. I've seen other setups where people pay based on a certain show percentage. For example, I might pay you and my expectation is that you book me 15 appointments a week and at least 10 of them have to show up for you to get fully paid. Or I've seen people actually pay a flat amount per appointment. Maybe you get paid 10 or 15 or $20 per appointment that you book. And then there's a bonus based on show factor. I've also seen people paid based on, show, like, hey, I'll give you $50 every time somebody shows up. So there's a couple different structures there, but what I would just say is I'd highly encourage you to have a component of it, if not the majority of it, based on performance. But in terms of that search for the right person, I want to have someone who they can't maybe feel like a good fit. It's got to be 100% clear because there's a lot of fish in the sea. So I have the feeling that this maybe isn't the right person, and maybe they're a little entitled on the pay, or maybe they're not as willing to be coachable on some suggestions I make. I'm going to get rid of that person quickly.
Man, I agree. I've done it a lot of different ways as far as pay structure goes. And everybody I've talked to, I can't remember a single person telling me just paying a flat hourly is the way to go. Like I've probably talked to hundreds of people that have dialers and appointment setters and stuff like that on their team. And every single one of them says you need to have some form of a commission component. What was the most successful for me, and I guess I can back up to what I'm looking for. So I want to make sure that, of course, we have somebody who's detail oriented because they need to be taking notes. I'm looking for somebody who learns quickly because they're going to need to pick up objections and stuff like that on the fly. Somebody who's outgoing, who's easy to talk to. But I think one of the most important things that I'm looking for is, somebody who is over communicates, right? Who's telling me like, hey, set this appointment. Here's the info. Hey, I heard this from this person. This is what they said. It just they're always in sort of constant communication about the work that they're doing, because I need to be able to take my hand off of that part of the business. And it's really difficult to do that if I need to constantly be checking on that person over and over and over again. I may as well just be making the calls myself. Right. If I have to if that person isn't telling me what they're running into, or, giving me their real time numbers and, wanting to get better, it's a little difficult for me to manage them. So onto the pay structure thing is, I personally had the most success paying per show. And so there's tons of people, like Grant just said, that will do, hey, you get X amount of dollars per hour, and then you get X number, you X percentage, of commission. I always had the most success just saying like, hey, you get X amount when somebody shows up to an appointment, because it gave a different sense of responsibility to the dialer to make sure that people showed up to the appointment. They were invested in getting people to the appointment, so they would lock the appointment down. It was disappointing to them, just like it was for me when somebody didn't show up, right? They felt it. And so I personally would pay a little bit more for a shown appointment than I would just like a blanket, you get X amount of dollars per appointment, right? Or you get X flat fee. And there's probably some hybrids that are out there. Do what works for you. But I think to round everything out, if you're bringing on an employee, any final thoughts from you guys of like, what's the biggest thing to watch out for, the biggest pitfall, and the last piece of advice? Go ahead, Ashton.
One of the biggest things to point out that Grant brought up is, you can't do that pay structure unless they're licensed, and that makes it legal. So, hey, that agent having a license means that you can compensate them for the sale of insurance. So, hey, maybe if you're newer, or maybe you just don't know or don't remember if you're testing, you can't legally compensate someone that does not have an insurance license for the sale of insurance. So when you have a licensed agent who is your appointment setter, you can have pay structures where you're bonusing them off of the sale of insurance. And if not, if it is an unlicensed appointment setter, those can still work. Like you're saying, hey, every shown appointment, whether I make a sale or not, just like you could if a client gave you a referral, hey, if you give me a referral, I'll give you X amount of dollars. You can do that legally because it has to be not based on the sale of insurance. So like your appointments start to go, hey, every X amount of shown appointments, we're going to have this type of bonus. Or maybe it's tiered. If I have 5, it's this level. Once you hit 10, it bumps up even more. I've seen some people have the mix. That's the other thing. A lot of people, like you said, if you set X amount, I'll give you X dollar. I'll give you $10 for every set one. And then if you have them show, I'll give you $25 or whatever the case is.
give them an incentive to get the result that you want out of it, for sure, and have it be better for them if you do better, which I think is a great point. But being licensed, or having them be licensed that you can split commission, I think is a great point a lot of people miss. So
yeah, the last thing I would encourage people to do is get themselves to a point where you need one. Like Ashton, you talked earlier, like, you do need to be a substantial producer to be able to do one. That for me, I did get to the point where I was writing 30 plus 35, 40,000 plus a month before that became a necessity for me. So, get yourself to the point where you actually need one, get yourself to the point where you have a level of profitability to make that happen. And then when you find the right person, it's going to allow you to be so much more efficient and so much more profitable. But also be careful. If you do it too early, if you do it when you're not ready, if you do it when you haven't developed those skills yet, you can actually take something that can be effective and can be profitable, and it can have a negative effect. You can lose money. It can cost you time. It can cost you energy. So be careful. Hiring staff is always a double-edged sword, but if done the right way, it's necessary to go.
I guess my last little piece of advice would be hire slowly and fire quickly, right? Hire slow, fire fast. Get rid of people as soon as you know this is probably not going to work out, right? And don't feel some sense of loyalty to like having to keep them on and having to train them and having to develop them. Now, you have to watch it a little bit because you need to give somebody some runway to learn. And I think there's a difference between being reasonable and giving somebody some runway to learn versus if you see in the second week they're not making any progress and like you're just wasting money and it's going to be a long road. Just let that person go. It's going to be a struggle for them. You're going to waste a bunch of money. Your business might not make it, right? Get somebody who is competent in that role. So hire slowly, do your due diligence, fire fast. We're going to be back. We're going to be hitting you guys with all kinds of topics and guests and a lot of fun stuff. We can't wait to enjoy another great year with you guys. Make sure you like and subscribe. We'll be back to you soon. Later, everybody. Peace.